When the engines of power thunder through neighborhoods in silence, when unmarked vans roll up to work sites, and when fear becomes policy, some voices will not remain quiet. One of those voices belongs to Mark Ruffalo. He is no stranger to standing on the front lines of moral conviction. And when injustice shouts, he responds not with politeness, but with purpose. The Oscar-nominated actor, a fierce advocate for human rights and a committed critic of both cruelty and hypocrisy in politics, has now turned his attention to the storm swirling around immigration in America, and to those who speak from powerful platforms without fully confronting the reality on the ground. It began with ICE raids. It began with construction workers pulled from job sites. With gardeners, landscapers, and laborers, men and women who had built this country brick by brick, being pulled aside, questioned, detained. It didn't begin with criminals. It began with families, with fathers, with brothers, with mothers returning home after cleaning houses. And it came at the command of a government wielding fear as an enforcement tool. Donald Trump's administration, unrelenting in its focus on deportation, unleashed a wave of ICE operations across cities like Los Angeles. These were not precision strikes against violent offenders. They were broad sweeps. They were made for TV muscle flexing. And for those caught in the dragnet, there was no script, no camera, no mercy. Mark Ruffalo watched. And he did not sit quietly. He raised his voice, not for headlines, but for humanity. But to his surprise, and to the surprise of many, Joe Rogan, podcasting powerhouse, cultural commentator, and voice of millions, echoed some of that concern. On the July 2 episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, Rogan took a rare step. He questioned the intent and target of these federal operations. Speaking to guest Amjad Masad, CEO of Replit, Rogan did not hold back. We were told there would be no, well, there's two things that are insane, he began. One is the targeting of migrant workers. Not cartel members, not gang members, not drug dealers. Just construction workers. Showing up in construction sites, raiding them. Gardeners. Like, really. That tone, incredulous, even appalled, was something many listeners hadn't heard from Rogan on this issue before. And yet, for Mark Ruffalo, it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because words without responsibility are just sound. Ruffalo, who had condemned these immigration tactics for years, wasn't interested in selective outrage. He wasn't satisfied with after-the-fact criticism. He demanded accountability. And from his perspective, Joe Rogan, with his massive audience and undeniable influence, had too often allowed rhetoric to drown reason. Ruffalo didn't mince his message. He called out not only the policy but the complacency that allowed it to grow. He called out the performative reactions, the surprise, at something that had been happening for years. He reminded the public that these weren't new tactics. That the fear in immigrant communities hadn't just begun. That Trump's directive didn't come out of nowhere. It was built on years of vilification, of media scapegoating, of political demonization. He asked, where was the outrage before the raids began? Where was the voice when kids were put in cages? When asylum seekers were turned away at the border? Ruffalo has never been neutral. And neutrality, he says, is a choice. A dangerous one. He believes that the fight for immigrant justice isn't about politics. It's about people. And every moment of silence is complicity. So when Rogan said, really, Ruffalo responded, yes. Really. And it's been real for a long time. He reminded Rogan and the public that these migrant workers aren't faceless. They are neighbors. They are classmates. They are fellow human beings trying to survive. Ruffalo didn't call for debate. He called for solidarity. He didn't care about left or right, he cared about right and wrong. And he's not alone. In the streets of Los Angeles, protests erupted. People marched not because they wanted to be heard, but because they refused to be ignored. They chanted the names of those taken. They carried signs in English and Spanish, pleading not for permission, but for justice. The ICE raids sparked flames. But the fuel had been gathering for years. And now, the voices refusing to stay quiet are growing louder. Joe Rogan may have joined the chorus late. But Mark Ruffalo demands more than a chorus. He demands action. He demands reckoning. He demands that powerful platforms speak when it matters most, not just when the headlines sting. Because to Ruffalo, silence is a privilege. And privilege unchecked is power wasted. This is not a script. This is not a rehearsal. This is real life, and the stakes are too high for indifference. So Ruffalo continues. He speaks. He resists. He challenges. Not for fame. Not for politics. But for people, the ones in the vans, in the shadows, in the waiting rooms. Because someone must. And if those with millions of followers won't lead, he will. He always has. And he always will.